The Miami sun beat down on the glass facade of the Grand Horizon Hotel, its sleek towers reflecting the ocean's shimmer. Inside, the air conditioning hummed softly, and the marble floors gleamed under the weight of hurried footsteps. In a penthouse conference room, the air was thick with tension. A billion-dollar deal between an American energy conglomerate and Omar al-Bayati, a Middle Eastern magnate whose name carried the weight of oil fields and influence, teetered on the edge of collapse. Voices clashed, sharp and urgent, as papers rustled and pens scratched. Lena Mueller, 27, pushed her cleaning cart through the hallway just outside. Her dark brown hair was tied back in a neat ponytail, her uniform crisp but unadorned. No makeup touched her face, no jewelry caught the light. Her eyes, sharp yet steady, held a quiet intensity that made you pause if you looked too long. She was invisible to the suited men and women rushing past, their voices loud with self-assurance. But Lena heard everything. The clipped English, the whispered Arabic, the undercurrents of power in every word. Inside the conference room, the interpreter, a wiry man named Daniel, with glasses slipping down his nose, fumbled a critical phrase. Financial guarantee became upfront payment a misstep that struck like a match in dry grass. Omar al-Bayati, dressed in a white thobe that likely cost more than the polished mahogany table, rose to his feet. His gold-rimmed sunglasses caught the chandelier's glow as he barked in Arabic, "Do the Americans think we're street vendors, haggling over scraps?" The room didn't catch every word, but the insult landed like a slap. Faces froze. Pens stopped mid-scribble. Richard Hayes, the American team's leader, wore a tailored navy suit and a smug grin that was starting to crack. He stammered, "I'm terribly sorry. Your Excellency, that wasn't our intent." But Omar was already striding toward the door, his assistant scrambling behind him, clutching a leather portfolio. The air felt heavy, the deal slipping away like sand through fingers. Lena, mopping the hallway just beyond the glass doors, paused. She set her mop against the wall, its handle a quiet sentinel, and stepped forward. With a slight bow, she spoke in flawless Arabic, her voice calm but firm. "Forgive them, Your Excellency. They meant to assure a fair partnership, not to demand payment." The room went still. Omar stopped mid-stride, his hand on the doorframe, and turned slowly. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, locked onto Lena. "You speak my language?" he asked, his tone low, testing. She bowed again just a touch and replied, "I lived in Jordan for 7 years." Her dialect was perfect, the kind of Arabic you don't learn from apps or textbooks, laced with the cadence of Amman's streets. The silence stretched heavy and electric. Richard's mouth hung open, his pen frozen in the air. Daniel, the interpreter, pushed his glasses up his face, pale as if he'd been caught stealing. Omar tilted his head, studying Lena like she was a puzzle he hadn't expected to solve. Catherine, a member of the American team with a sleek bob and a silk scarf that screamed expense, leaned toward her colleague and whispered loud enough for the room to hear, "Who let the cleaning lady in here? Does she think she's part of this?" Her laugh was sharp like glass breaking, and a few others snickered. Lena's fingers tightened briefly on her apron, but her face remained calm. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the jab. Instead, she squared her shoulders just enough to show she'd heard. Catherine's colleague, a man with a flashy watch and a smirk, added, "Maybe she's here to mop up our mistakes." The laughter spread low and cruel, rolling through the room like a wave. Lena's eyes flicked to the side for a moment, catching Catherine's gaze. "Intent matters," she said softly in Arabic, her voice barely above a whisper. Catherine froze, her smirk fading, unsure if she'd been addressed. The hotel manager, Victor, a wiry man with slicked back hair and a tie that screamed self-importance, burst into the room. His face was pale, his jaw tight. He marched straight to Lena, grabbing her arm like she was a child caught misbehaving. "What are you doing?" he hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. "You have no right to interfere in this negotiation." His voice cut through the tension like a knife. Lena didn't pull away, didn't argue. She just looked at him, her face calm, and gave a small nod. Victor kept going, his finger jabbing the air. "You're a housekeeper, Lena. You clean floors. You don't belong here." The American team shifted uncomfortably, some staring at their shoes, others pretending to check their phones. Omar watched his expression, unreadable arms crossed. Lena bowed slightly to Victor, her hands still clasped, and walked toward the door, her steps slow and deliberate. The mop stood propped against the wall, a silent witness to the moment. As she reached the doorway, a young assistant from Omar's team, a man with a neatly trimmed beard and a nervous habit of checking his watch, stepped forward. He cleared his throat and said in Arabic, "Leaving already, the room's not clean yet." His tone was mocking, and a few others chuckled, their eyes darting to Lena's back. She paused for a second, her hand resting on the door frame. Without turning, she replied in Arabic, "Even cleanliness starts with respect." The assistant's smile vanished, his watch checking forgotten. Omar's lips twitched, almost a smile, but he said nothing. The room felt heavier, the laughter replaced by an awkward silence as Lena walked out her steps. Echoing faintly in the hall, nobody spoke. The air grew colder, thick with unspoken judgment. Victor straightened his tie, muttering something about standards to Richard, who nodded but kept glancing at the door. Omar hadn't moved, his assistants whispering to each other, their eyes flicking between their boss and the empty doorway. Daniel, the interpreter, tried to restart the conversation, but his voice cracked and no one listened. The deal hung by a thread, and everyone knew it. Outside, Lena leaned against the hallway wall for a moment, her fingers brushing the edge of her notebook tucked into her apron pocket. She took a slow breath, then kept walking, her shoes silent on the polished marble. In the service corridor, a group of kitchen staff, their aprons stained with grease, spotted her. One, a burly chef named Marco with a loud voice and a habit of waving his ladle, called out, "Hey, it's the maid who thinks she's a big shot now." His laugh boomed, echoing off the tiled walls. The others joined in, their voices sharp with teasing. "What's next, Lena? You gonna run the hotel?" Another said, tossing a damp dish rag in her direction. It landed at her feet, crumpled and wet. Lena stopped, her hand resting lightly on her cart. She bent down, picked up the rag, and folded it neatly, setting it on a nearby cart. "Work doesn't need a title," she said, her voice soft but clear, her eyes meeting Marco's. His laugh faltered, his ladle lowering as the others went quiet, their smirks fading. Lena turned and continued down the corridor, leaving the silence behind her. In the hotel lobby, a group of guests in expensive suits and dripping with jewelry noticed Lena as she passed. One woman, draped in a designer shawl, said loudly, "Is that the maid who thought she could play diplomat?" Her friends laughed, their glasses clinking as they sipped champagne. Lena's steps slowed, but she didn't turn. She adjusted her cart, her fingers deliberate, and kept walking. The woman's companion, a man with a loud tie and an even louder laugh, called after her, "Stick to the mop, sweetheart." Lena stopped for a moment, glancing back. Her eyes met his, calm but piercing. "A mop cleans floors," she said quietly. "What cleans arrogance?" The man's laugh died, his glass frozen halfway to his mouth. The group fell silent, their eyes darting away as Lena pushed her cart through the revolving doors. Back in the conference room, the mood was dour. Richard tried to smooth things over, offering Omar a weak smile and a new set of papers. "Your Excellency, if we could just clarify." But Omar raised a hand, cutting him off. His voice was low, deliberate. "Let her sit," he said, his eyes still on the door. The room froze again. Victor, hovering near the back, stepped forward, his face twisting. "Sir, she's just—" Omar's gaze shifted to him, and Victor stopped mid-sentence, his mouth snapping shut. "Let her sit," Omar repeated slower this time. "She will translate." Nobody moved for a second, as if waiting for a punchline. Then one of Omar's assistants pulled out a chair, the scrape of wood against the floor echoing in the silence. Lena was called back. She walked in, her face still calm, and sat down. She opened her notebook, her pen steady, and began translating. Every word was crisp, every phrase exact. Omar gave a small nod, his lips pressed tight, saying nothing. The room watched, recalculating, as if they'd missed something vital. Catherine's smile was tight, her fingers gripping her scarf. Richard stole glances at Lena, his frown deepening, unable to place her in his world of titles and power. The deal, fragile as it was, began to stabilize word by word, as Lena's voice filled the space. During a break, Catherine approached Lena, her smile thin and insincere. "You must feel so special stepping in like that," she said, her voice dripping with honeyed venom. "But let's be honest, you're out of your depth, aren't you?" She tilted her head, waiting for a reaction. Lena set her pen down, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked at Catherine, her eyes steady, and said, "Depth isn't measured by titles." Catherine's smile faltered, her fingers tightening on her scarf. The other team members glanced over their conversations, pausing. Lena picked up her pen again, her focus returning to her notebook, as if Catherine's words were just background noise. As the meeting resumed, Lena's translations carried a weight beyond words. She caught the nuances, the unspoken agreements, the subtle shifts in Omar's tone. The room began to hum with a new rhythm, the tension easing. Nobody expected a housekeeper to hold $1 billion deal together, but Lena did one sentence at a time. When the session ended, Omar stood, gave Lena a long look, and left without a word. The American team packed up, muttering about deadlines and flights. Victor, though, wasn't done. He waited in the lobby, his arms crossed, his face red. When Lena passed, he stepped in front of her. "Who do you think you are?" he snapped. A floor cleaner playing translator. "You've shamed this hotel." Lena didn't answer. She reached into her pocket, pulled off her name tag, and set it on the counter with a soft click. The sound felt final, like a door closing. She bowed slightly, just as she had in the meeting, and walked away, her notebook still in her hand. A couple of guests in the lobby glanced over, their eyes soft with pity, but Lena didn't look back. She moved through the revolving doors, her steps steady, her face unreadable. Behind her, Victor was already on the phone, his voice loud as he demanded her termination. "She's done here," he said, pacing. "No one makes a fool of me like that." The concierge, a young woman with a tight bun, overheard and shook her head, her lips pursed. She'd seen Lena work late shifts, never complaining, always thorough, but she said nothing. Nobody did. As Lena stepped outside, the Miami heat hit her like a wave. A hotel valet, a young guy with a crooked smile and a habit of talking too fast, called out, "Hey, you're the one who spoke Arabic, right? What you think you're some kind of hero?" Now, his tone was light, but the jab was sharp. A few other valets laughed, leaning against the parked cars. Lena paused her cart beside her. She turned slightly, her eyes meeting his. "Heroes don't clean floors," she said, her voice soft but clear. "But they don't mock them either." The valet's smile faded, his hands shoving into his pockets. The others went quiet, their laughter cut short. Lena turned and kept walking, the sunlight glinting off the glass doors behind her. That evening, a message arrived at the hotel's front desk marked urgent and sealed with wax. It was from Omar al-Bayati's office. The concierge handed it to Victor, who opened it with a smirk, expecting an apology for the chaos. His face fell as he read it. The note was short. "I need to speak with her privately." Victor's hands shook as he folded the paper, his jaw tight. He didn't say a word to the staff, just stormed off to his office. Lena was called to the penthouse. She walked in still in her uniform, expecting a lecture. Instead, she found Omar sitting at a glass table, a small box in front of him. He gestured for her to sit. She did, her hands folded in her lap. He slid the box toward her, his face serious. Inside was a letter sealed with an official crest. Lena opened it, her fingers careful as if handling something fragile. It was an invitation to join the language advisory panel at the Qatar Energy Summit. Omar leaned back, his voice steady. "You didn't just translate," he said. "You understood intent, something most advisors lack after decades." Lena folded the letter, her movements slow, and tucked it into her notebook. She stood, bowed slightly to Omar, and walked out, the weight of the moment settling around her like a quiet storm. The world had shifted not because she demanded it, but because she'd spoken when no one else could. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was strength, carved from years of being unseen. And as she stepped into the elevator, her notebook in hand, she knew the path ahead would be anything but easy. The Doha sun pressed against the towering glass of the Qatar Energy Summit's conference center, its heat a relentless presence even through the tinted windows. Inside, the air was cool, sharp, with the scent of polished wood and expensive perfume. Lena Muller walked through the marble-floored lobby, her plain black dress a stark contrast to the tailored suits and glittering accessories around her. Her dark brown hair was still tied back in a neat ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her eyes steady but alert. She carried a small bag with her notebook inside its worn edges, a quiet testament to her discipline. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, their voices a mix of English, Arabic, and half a dozen other languages, but their glances at Lena were less welcoming. Curious, skeptical, sometimes cutting. She was no longer just a housekeeper from the Grand Horizon Hotel in Miami. Omar al-Bayati's invitation had thrust her into a world of high-stakes diplomacy and billion-dollar deals, but the weight of her past clung to her like a shadow. Whispers followed her as she moved through the hall, her steps measured. "That's the maid who got lucky." A man in a pinstriped suit muttered to his colleague, his voice low but not low enough. Lena's fingers tightened briefly on her bag, but her face remained calm. She'd heard worse in Miami, and she wasn't here to prove them right. In a breakout session, Lena sat at a long table surrounded by interpreters and advisors, their badges gleaming with titles like Senior Consultant and Cultural Liaison. She opened her notebook, her pen poised as the group reviewed documents for the upcoming OPEC summit. A man across from her, Khalid, wore a crisp suit and a condescending smile that seemed to come with the territory. He leaned back in his chair, his voice carrying as he said, "So you're the housekeeper everyone's talking about. Must be nice to skip the line." Heads turned, some smirking, others looking away. Lena set her pen down, her movements deliberate, and met his gaze. "Lines don't matter," she said, her voice low but clear. "Accuracy does." She picked up a complex trade agreement and began translating her Arabic flawless, her pronunciation weaving the formal cadence of classical texts with the precision of a native speaker. The room's attention shifted, Khalid's smirk fading as her expertise filled the space. The session moved forward, but the undercurrent of doubt lingered. During a coffee break, a journalist approached Lena, his tie loud and his grin sharper. "You're the cleaning lady who charmed her way here, right?" he said, his pen already scribbling. "Care to comment on how you pulled it off?" Lena set her coffee cup down, her eyes steady. "Charm doesn't speak languages," she said. "Work does." The journalist's pen paused, his grin faltering. He scribbled her words, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of disappointment. He'd wanted a scandal, not a truth. Nearby, a group of advisors whispered their glances darting toward her. One woman, her hair pinned in an elaborate updo, muttered, "She's just a fluke. She'll crash soon enough." Lena heard, but didn't react. She sipped her coffee, her focus returning to her notebook, where she jotted down a new Arabic phrase she'd overheard, committing it to memory. Back at the Grand Horizon in Miami, the air had shifted. Victor, the manager who'd berated Lena, was gone, his office quietly cleared out. A new manager, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, had taken his place without fanfare. But the gossip hadn't stopped. Clara, the front desk clerk with too much perfume and a fake smile, stood in the break room, her voice carrying. "She's not even that pretty," she said loud enough for the other staff to hear. Must have caught Omar's eye. That's all it took. A maintenance worker, a guy with gelled hair and a loud laugh, chimed in, "Yeah, I bet she batted her lashes and got a promotion." The others laughed, their voices sharp with envy. The rumor spread like wildfire, fueled by a tabloid headline that hit the internet, a wink that changed her life in Miami. Lena's phone buzzed with messages from old acquaintances, people she hadn't spoken to in years. "Really, Lena? That's how you got ahead," one read. Another just said, "Lucky break." She didn't respond. She deleted her social media apps, shut down the noise, and kept her notebook close its pages, a shield against the world's assumptions. In Doha, Lena faced new challenges. During a panel discussion, she was asked to clarify a cultural nuance in a contract clause, a subtle reference to tribal obligations that the American team had missed. Her explanation was concise, weaving historical context with practical implications, and the room nodded in approval. A young diplomat from a Gulf state, Faisal, approached her afterward, his badge dangling proudly. "You saved me from a mistake there," he said, his voice earnest. "I didn't know that phrase carried so much weight." Lena nodded, offering a small smile. "Words always carry more than they seem," she said. Faisal's eyes lit up, and he became an unexpected ally, seeking her advice in later sessions. But not everyone was so kind. A senior advisor, a woman with a pearl necklace and a clipped British accent, leaned toward her colleague during a break and said, "She's out of place here. A maid in a summit." "It's absurd." Lena overheard her fingers pausing on her notebook, but she didn't look up. She underlined a word, her pen steady, and kept working. The hotel staff in Doha weren't much kinder. As Lena passed through the service corridor after a long day, a group of waiters spotted her. One, a man with a crooked tie and a habit of chewing gum loudly, called out, "Hey, it's the maid who thinks she's a diplomat now." His laugh echoed off the tiled walls. Another tossed a napkin in her direction, letting it flutter to the floor. Lena stopped, picked it up, and folded it neatly, placing it on a nearby tray. "Work doesn't need a title," she said, her voice calm but firm, her eyes meeting his. The man's gum chewing slowed, his grin fading as the others fell silent. Lena walked on the corridor, quiet behind her. The rumors followed her online. Clara, back in Miami, had posted a snide comment on a guest's review of the Grand Horizon, hinting at Lena's undeserved rise. The post went viral, and a local fashion brand Clara had bragged about sponsoring pulled their deal, her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Lena heard about it through a text from a former co-worker, but she didn't respond. She was too focused on the summit where she was preparing for a critical session. During a rehearsal, she caught a mistranslation in a draft speech that could have offended a key delegate. She flagged it discreetly, suggesting a rephrase that preserved the speaker's intent. The session chair, an older man with a gray beard, nodded in approval. "You have a gift for this," he said, his voice low but genuine. Lena thanked him, her face calm, but inside she felt the weight of his words, a rare acknowledgement in a sea of skepticism. As the summit progressed, Lena's presence began to shift the room's dynamic. Advisors who'd dismissed her started listening when she spoke, their pens pausing as she clarified terms or cultural subtleties. But the doubt lingered. At a networking event, a woman in a designer dress, her voice dripping with condescension, approached Lena. "You must be thrilled to be here," she said, her smile tight. "But let's be real. This is a one-time thing, isn't it?" Lena set her glass down, her movements deliberate. "Opportunities don't define you," she said. "What you do with them does." The woman's smile faltered, her fingers tightening on her clutch. Others nearby glanced over their conversations, stalling, but Lena turned back to her notebook, jotting down a new phrase she'd heard in a side meeting. The pressure didn't let up. Back in Miami, the gossip had taken on a life of its own. A guest at the Grand Horizon. A businessman with a heavy accent and a gold watch asked about Lena at the front desk. "Is she the one who got famous?" he said, his grin wide. "Tell her to clean my room next time she's got skills." The other guests in line laughed, their voices carrying across the lobby. Clara smirked, leaning forward. "Oh, she's moved on to bigger things. Probably too good for us now." The concierge, a young woman with a tight bun, who'd worked with Lena, gripped her pen tighter, her knuckles white. She'd seen Lena scrub floors late into the night, never complaining, but she stayed silent. Lena wasn't there to hear it. She was in Doha preparing for a press conference, her notebook open, her pen moving. The press conference was daunting. Reporters packed the room, their cameras flashing, waiting for her to slip. Lena walked to the podium, her plain dress unremarkable, her hair still tied back. She opened with a passage in classical Arabic, her voice steady weaving Bedouin proverbs with a rhythm that felt timeless. The room went quiet. A professor, an older woman with silver hair and a notepad, stood up, her hands trembling as she clapped. "I haven't heard such fluency from an outsider in years," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Others joined her, their applause genuine. The next day, a headline appeared, "From housekeeper to linguistic star, Lena Mueller shines in Doha." Omar, reading the coverage in his office, gave a faint nod, his fingers tapping the desk. But the whispers didn't stop. Back at the conference center, a junior advisor, a man with slick hair and a smug grin, cornered Lena during a break. "I heard about you," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "The maid who stumbled into a big job. Bet you're just here for the photos." His laugh was sharp, meant to sting. Lena set her papers down, her movements precise, and looked at him. Her eyes were calm, but carried a weight. "Photos fade," she said, her voice low but clear. "Words last." The advisor's grin faltered, his badge suddenly seeming too big for his chest. The others in the room glanced away, their conversation stalling, as Lena returned to her documents, her pen moving steadily. As the summit neared its end, Lena was proposed as the lead interpreter for the upcoming OPEC conference. The news spread quickly, and so did the rumors. A tabloid ran a follow-up story, "Miami Maid's Meteoric Rise Luck," or something else. Lena's phone buzzed with more messages, some from strangers, others from old classmates. "You must have known someone," one read. She ignored them, her focus on the work ahead. But the weight of the scrutiny was heavy, and she knew the OPEC conference would be her biggest test yet. She opened her notebook, its pages filled with notes on new phrases, cultural references, and 3 languages she was teaching herself. The world could talk, but Lena was already moving forward. Her steps steady, her silence louder than their words. The Vienna air was sharp, carrying the faint chill of autumn as Lena Muller stepped into the grand conference hall of the OPEC summit. The space hummed with a restrained energy, like the quiet before a storm breaks. Her navy dress was plain, unadorned, a stark contrast to the tailored suits and glittering jewelry around her. Her dark brown hair remained tied back in a neat ponytail, her face free of makeup, her eyes sharp yet steady. Her notebook, its edges worn from constant use, was tucked under her arm. A quiet companion through her journey from a housekeeper in Miami to a lead interpreter at one of the world's most pivotal gatherings. The crowd parted slightly as she moved, their glances a mix of curiosity, respect, and lingering doubt. Lena's steps were measured, her presence undeniable, as if she'd always belonged in this world of power and precision. The hall was a tapestry of influence diplomats in crisp suits, advisors with badges proclaiming titles like senior strategist or global consultant, and reporters circling with notepads and cameras. Omar al-Bayati arrived last, his white thobe immaculate, his gold-rimmed sunglasses catching the chandelier's glow. He nodded to Lena before taking his seat, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. Richard Hayes, the American team leader, was there too, his once smug smile now tight, his confidence frayed since the Miami fiasco. He offered Lena a quick handshake, his eyes avoiding hers as if unsure how to place her in his world of titles and egos. The room watched as Lena took her place at the head of the table, her notebook open, her pen poised. She wasn't just translating today, she was steering the conversation, catching subtleties others missed, shaping the flow of a billion-dollar deal. The summit opened with a tense debate on oil production quotas, voices rising and falling like waves. Lena's voice cut through her Arabic crisp and precise, her English equally sharp. She didn't merely repeat words, she captured intent, the unspoken agreements in Omar's clipped responses, the diplomatic sidesteps of the American team. During a heated moment, a delegate's vague phrasing risked derailing the talks. Lena paused her pen, tapping once, and offered a rephrase that preserved the speaker's dignity while clarifying the point. The room nodded in unison, the tension easing. A senior delegate from a Gulf state leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with approval. "You see, beyond the words," he said quietly, almost to himself. Lena gave a small nod, her focus unbroken, her pen moving across her notebook. But the whispers followed her, even in this gilded hall. During a coffee break, a reporter cornered her near the refreshment table, his microphone too close, his grin hungry for a story. "How does a hotel maid rise this far?" he asked, his tone sharp, fishing for a headline. Lena set her cup down, her eyes calm but unflinching. "I never saw that job as beneath me," she said. "Wherever language exists, there's value." The reporter blinked his pen, pausing, then scribbled her words, his story shifting from scandal to substance. Nearby, a group of advisors overheard their murmurs, quieting as Lena returned to her notes, her pen scratching new phrases she'd caught in the morning session. The scrutiny wasn't limited to the press. In a side meeting, a junior diplomat from a rival delegation, a young man with slick hair and a smug grin, approached her. "I heard about you," he said, his voice loud enough to draw attention. "The maid who stumbled into a big job. Bet you're just here for the photo ops." His laugh was sharp, meant to sting. Lena set her papers down, her movements precise, and looked at him. Her eyes carried a quiet weight. Photos fade, she said, her voice low but clear. Words last. The diplomat's grin faltered, his badge suddenly seeming too big for his chest. The others in the room glanced away, their conversation stalling, as Lena returned to her documents, her focus unshaken. Back in Miami, the gossip had grown into a storm. Clara, the front desk clerk who'd mocked Lena, was reeling. A hotel guest had posted her snide comments online, and the post went viral, drawing thousands of shares. The local fashion brand Clara had bragged about sponsoring dropped her name, trending for all the wrong reasons. At the Grand Horizon, the new manager, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, had settled in, and the staff whispered about Lena's rise. She was always quiet, a concierge named Elena said to a co-worker, her voice soft. But she worked harder than anyone, scrubbing floors past midnight, never complaining. The co-worker nodded, her eyes on the floor, the weight of their silence heavy with regret. Another former colleague, Sarah, who'd joined the summit's support staff in Vienna, spread a rumor that Lena had charmed her way into Omar's favor. The story reached a tabloid which ran a headline, "Miami Maid's Meteoric Rise, Luck or Connections." Lena's phone buzzed with messages from strangers and old classmates. "You must have known someone," one read. Another said, "Nice hustle, but we know the truth." She ignored them, her focus on the summit, but the rumors stung, twisting her story into something cheap and unearned. In a rare, quiet moment, Lena was invited to speak to a group of university students attending the summit as observers. They gathered in a small conference room, their eyes wide with curiosity, some scribbling notes, others leaning forward. Lena stood at the front, her notebook in hand, and shared her story, not just the triumph, but the years of late-night shifts, the mockery, the languages she taught herself in stolen moments. "I was told I didn't belong," she said, her voice steady. But belonging isn't about titles or where you start. It's about what you carry inside your work, your will, your respect for yourself. The students listened, rapt, a girl in the back, wiping her eyes. A young man raised his hand, his voice hesitant. "How do you keep going when everyone doubts you?" Lena paused, her fingers brushing the worn edges of her notebook. "You don't prove them wrong," she said. "You prove yourself right." The room erupted in applause, the sound warm and genuine, carrying a weight that lingered long after she left the podium. One student, a young woman with braided hair, approached her afterward, her voice trembling. "I'm studying to be a translator, but people say I'm aiming too high. Thank you for showing me it's possible." Lena smiled, her eyes softening. "Keep your pen moving," she said. "That's all it takes." The summit's closing dinner was a lavish affair with crystal chandeliers casting light across tables laden with delicacies. Lena stood by the dessert table, her plate untouched, when a senior executive from the American team approached. He was an older man with gray hair and a Rolex that gleamed under the lights. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his voice smooth but patronizing. "But let's not pretend this isn't a fairy tale." His smile was thin, his eyes cold. Lena set her plate down, her movements deliberate. "Fairy tales end," she said. "Work doesn't." The executive's smile froze, his hand tightening on his glass. The guests nearby went quiet, their conversations pausing as Lena walked away, her steps calm, her presence unshaken. The summit ended with a historic agreement on production quotas, and Lena's role was undeniable. Omar stood at the closing ceremony, his voice carrying across the hall. "Lena Mueller is my senior advisor," he declared, his words blunt and final. "She's the reason I'm investing $2 billion in American energy." The room buzzed, cameras flashing as the news rippled outward. Reuters published an article the next day, its headline, bold, "From Housekeeper to Powerhouse." Lena Mueller redefines diplomacy. Investors took notice, their emails flooding Lena's inbox, requesting meetings, partnerships, advice. She didn't gloat, didn't celebrate. She opened her notebook, its pages dense with notes on 3 new languages, Mandarin, French, and Persian, and kept working her pen a steady rhythm against the noise. Back in Miami, the Grand Horizon felt different. The new manager had brought a quieter discipline, and the staff spoke of Lena in hushed tones. "She was one of us," a bellhop said, shaking his head. "We should have seen it." Clara had quit her reputation bruised by her own words. The American team lost a major contract, their Miami fumble a stain they couldn't shake. Nobody mentioned Lena's name in those stories, but the truth hung heavy, undeniable. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her steps were steady, her presence enough. On a flight back to the U.S. for a brief visit, Lena sat at her aunt's kitchen table in a small Florida town, the air thick with the smell of coffee and fresh bread. Her relatives, a mix of cousins and uncles who'd never left their hometown, leaned back in their chairs, skeptical. "You just got lucky," her cousin Mia said, her nails tapping the table. "Right place, right time, that's all." Her uncle nodded, his cap pulled low. "Don't get cocky, Lena. It's not like you earned it." Lena smiled, her hands wrapped around her mug. She didn't argue, didn't explain. Later on, her flight back to Qatar, she opened her notebook, its pages filled with new phrases, verb, conjugations, and cultural notes. A young Syrian boy across the aisle chattered to his mother, his voice bright with excitement. Lena leaned over, said something in Arabic, and the boy giggled, his mother's eyes softening with gratitude. "You've given him a memory," the mother whispered, her voice thick. Lena nodded, her smile small but warm. At the airport in Doha, a flight attendant with a tight smile noticed Lena's notebook. Studying on a plane, she said, her tone sharp, as if catching Lena in a misstep. "You must think you're important now." Lena closed her notebook, her fingers steady, and looked up. "Learning never stops," she said, her voice soft but clear. The flight attendant's smile tightened and she walked away, her heels clicking against the floor. The boy's mother gave Lena a small nod, her eyes warm with understanding. Lena reopened her notebook, her pen moving again as if the interruption had never happened. The lesson wasn't in the headlines or the applause. It was in the quiet moments, Lena's pen scratching late at night, her steady steps through rooms full of sneers, her refusal to let the world define her. She'd been underestimated, mocked, dismissed, but she'd never stopped. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was strength carved from years of being unseen. She'd turned doubt into opportunity not by shouting, but by working, by learning, by carrying her dignity through every slight. To everyone who's ever been looked down on, who's felt the sting of judgment, who's carried their worth through a world that tried to strip it away, you weren't wrong. You weren't small. You were seen. You still are. The world may talk, but your work speaks louder. Keep your notebook open, your pen, moving your steps steady. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and follow along for more stories of heartbreak, betrayal, and the quiet strength that heals.